Bible Verse Daily. Learn one verse every day. Proverbs chapter 3 verse 5 has sometimes been used in ways that make it sound like an argument against thinking, against analysis, against human reasoning altogether. Lean not on your own understanding has been quoted to discourage critical questions, to shut down doubt, and to suggest that using your mind is somehow a failure of faith. But that is almost certainly not what the verse means. The book of Proverbs is itself an intellectual project. It is a collection of teaching about how to observe life carefully and derive wisdom from what you see. The entire book is built on the premise that human beings can and should think, observe, and reason. Solomon, who is credited with much of Proverbs, was renowned precisely for his extraordinary wisdom and capacity for understanding. So the verse cannot be an argument against those things. What it is arguing against is something more specific: the particular error of trusting your own analysis so completely that God's perspective becomes irrelevant. There is a crucial difference between using your understanding and leaning on your own understanding. One is a gift. The other is a posture of self-sufficiency that crowns your own judgment as the final authority on everything. The verse is diagnosing a posture, not dismissing a capacity. Proverbs chapter 3 verse 5 comes inside the opening section of the book, chapters 1 through 9, which is structured as a father's extended instruction to his son. The address "my son" appears repeatedly throughout these chapters, framing everything that follows as intimate personal teaching from someone who has lived longer and seen more to someone just beginning to navigate the world. Solomon, who is named in the opening verse as the author of the collection, was writing as a king, a builder, a diplomat, and a man who had navigated extraordinary prosperity and its temptations. The royal court of Israel under Solomon was a place of international exchange, trade, political complexity, and wealth on a scale Israel had never previously seen. His son would inherit all of that. The instructions in Proverbs chapter 3 are a father's attempt to give his child an orientation toward life that will hold when the complexity gets overwhelming. Before verse 5, Solomon has already said in verse 3 to bind mercy and truth around your neck and write them on your heart. The trust he calls for in verse 5 is therefore set inside a broader framework of character formation, not merely a single act of faith, but a whole way of being oriented in the world. When Proverbs chapter 3 verse 5 says trust in the Lord with all your heart, the word translated as heart is the Hebrew lev or labab, and in the ancient Hebrew worldview, the heart was not primarily the seat of emotion the way we think of it in English. The heart was the center of the entire person, encompassing the intellect, the will, the emotions, and the moral character together. It was the place of decision-making, reasoning, and orientation. To trust with all your heart was therefore to trust with your entire self, mind and will included. The word for trust is batash, which means to be confident in, to be secure because of, to rely on without anxiety. It carries the sense of leaning your full weight on something you have found to be reliable. The second phrase, lean not on your own understanding, uses the Hebrew bina, which specifically means insight, discernment, the kind of understanding that comes from careful analysis. Bina is actually praised elsewhere in Proverbs as a virtue to be sought. The issue is not the capacity for understanding. The issue is the verb lean, which in Hebrew is san, meaning to support oneself against, to rest your full weight on. The verse is about where you place the weight of your confidence when you have to decide something important. Proverbs chapter 3 verse 5 has been interpreted across multiple traditions, and it touches on a tension that virtually every wisdom tradition in human history has identified: the tension between human reasoning and recognition of something larger than human reasoning. In the Jewish tradition, this verse is often read in the context of Torah study. The rabbis did not see trusting God as opposed to rigorous intellectual engagement with texts and arguments. Rather, the study of Torah was itself an act of trust, placing your mind under the authority of a revealed wisdom beyond your own. The Talmudic tradition is deeply rational and argumentative precisely because it takes seriously the idea that God gave a mind to be used. In Christian interpretation, the verse has sometimes been read as a warning against the pride of the Enlightenment project, the idea that human reason is self-sufficient. Augustine's famous statement that our hearts are restless until they rest in God captures a similar insight. In the Reformed tradition, Calvin emphasized total dependence on God's revelation as the only reliable foundation for wisdom. The mystical traditions within both Christianity and Judaism have read the verse as an invitation to move beyond discursive thinking into a deeper mode of trust, that does not rest on what the mind can figure out alone. All of these streams identify the same problem: the self-referential loop of trusting only one's own conclusions. The practical question Proverbs chapter 3 verse 5 is asking is deceptively simple. When you are facing a decision, a crisis, and uncertainty, where do you ultimately put your weight? We all use our understanding. We all gather information, analyze options, consider consequences. That is not what the verse is challenging. What it is challenging is the posture that says, I have thought about this carefully enough that I no longer need outside input, including God's. That posture can look very competent and confident from the outside. But it is also very brittle, because it makes your inner conclusions the final authority over everything. What Solomon is teaching his son is that there is a kind of trust that runs underneath the thinking, not replacing it but preceding it. The acknowledgement in verse 6, "In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your path straight," suggests this is a continuous orientation rather than an emergency prayer. It is not bringing God in when your own thinking fails. It is walking with an awareness that your own thinking, however good, is not the highest court of appeal. For someone raised to value intelligence and analysis, this is genuinely hard. It requires intellectual humility that is different from intellectual weakness. Proverbs chapter 3 verse 5 is not a warning against thinking. It is a warning against the self-sufficiency that puts your own judgment above all other input, including God's. The Hebrew lev, heart, means the entire self, mind and will included. The word batash, trust, means placing your full weight on something you have found reliable. And Solomon wrote this as a father to a son about to navigate a complicated world, teaching him that wisdom begins not with confidence in your own conclusions, but with orientation toward a wisdom larger than your own. If this verse study helped you go deeper, please like, comment, and subscribe to Bible Verse Daily for a new verse study every week. Hit the bell notification so you never miss one. New verse studies every week.